"You're not husband material. Let's be honest," she said during a serious conversation. I didn't respond and walked away. Months later, she saw me living the life she said I wasn't capable of having without her. "You're not husband material." She said it like it was already decided. Let's be honest. Those 3 extra words were the knife after the cut. I looked at her across the table. She wasn't crying. She wasn't angry. She was calm in a way that told me this sentence had lived inside her for a long time before today. She'd rehearsed the composure, practiced the delivery, and in that silence between her words and my response, I felt something I hadn't expected. Not devastation, not the rage that might have made sense. Something quieter, something that felt almost like recognition. I picked up my jacket from the chair by the door. I didn't say a word. I didn't defend myself. I didn't ask what she meant, or what the standard was, or how she had arrived at that conclusion after nearly 4 years together. I just walked out. No door slam. No last look designed to communicate something. Just footsteps, and then a closed door, and then open air. She probably thought I needed time to fall apart. She probably expected a text by nightfall. She was wrong. And what happened over the next 8 months? She never saw coming. Here's what that sentence actually was. It wasn't an insult said in anger, where you could dismiss it as heat of the moment. It was a verdict, delivered carefully, in the middle of an ordinary Sunday morning. Coffee still warm on the table, toast sitting on a plate, sunlight coming through her apartment window like nothing significant was happening, like background settings in a scene where something important was about to change. And something was. She had decided. Not about the future of the relationship, not about whether to try something different, about me, about what I was capable of, about what kind of man I was and wasn't. And I want you to understand the weight of that, because it matters for everything that comes after. Almost 4 years. 4 years of showing up, adjusting, learning, trying. 4 years of conversations about moving in together, about the future, about what kind of life we were building. 4 years of me. And at the end of it, the verdict was not enough. The worst part wasn't the words. The worst part was standing there and feeling some small, battered corner of myself wondering if she might be right. I didn't realize it then, but that moment changed everything. If you enjoy real stories like this, subscribe, because what happened next changed everything for me. I was 28. She, Brooke, was 27, and we'd been together 3 years and 9 months. Different apartments, same city, and a 6-month conversation about finally moving in together that had mostly been her planning and me listening. That's all you need for now. The rest comes later. The thing about Brooke was that she was a planner. Not casually, architecturally. 5-year spreadsheets, color-coded notes on her phone, a vision board she'd updated twice in the time I'd known her. And I had genuinely admired that quality in the beginning. There's something compelling about someone who knows where they're going. It feels like momentum. It feels like you're going somewhere too. But there's a version of that quality that slowly turns. That stops being about direction and starts being about control. And I didn't see that turning until I was already well inside it. We met at a mutual friend's birthday gathering. She laughed at something I said before I even finished the sentence. That kind of thing matters in the beginning. It feels like being seen before you've even tried. The first year was easy in the way only first years can be. No real pressure. No real template. Just 2 people who enjoyed each other and hadn't yet revealed all the parts of themselves that required more work. We traveled a little, cooked together often, stayed up late talking about things that felt enormous and important. She was funny and sharp, and when she focused her attention on you, it felt like sunlight. I fell for her honestly. No performance. The second year is where I started feeling something shift. Not in one obvious moment. In degrees. Small calibrations. The way a compass needle moves without you watching it. She started making comments about my job. Nothing vicious. More like editorial. I was in sales, regional accounts for a mid-sized company. Good work. Consistent performance. I hit my targets reliably and had a reputation for it. But Brooke had different metrics. You could be doing so much more, became a recurring refrain. Not said with excitement for my potential. Said with a quiet implication that I was underperforming against some standard she'd already established without telling me. I tried to interpret it charitably. Everyone wants more for the people they love, right? But wanting more for someone and wanting more from someone are not the same thing. One expands you, the other measures you. I started to understand that difference somewhere in that second year. I just didn't act on it yet. By the third year, the comments had pattern and consistency. About my apartment, too casual, not enough intention behind it. About my friendships, Qley especially. Qley had been my closest friend since we were 19 years old. We talked multiple times a week, saw each other regularly. Brooke thought it was excessive. You prioritize him like you're still in your early 20s. We were in our mid-20s. I didn't understand the math. Then came the comments about my side project, a consulting model I'd been developing quietly for several months, built on my sales experience and industry knowledge. The idea was to help small businesses with their growth strategy. Not a fantasy, not wishful thinking. Something with real structure, genuine research behind it, and early conversations with business owners who were already interested. I told her about it over dinner one evening in November. I was more excited than I'd been about anything in a long time. I could actually hear it in my own voice. That particular energy that comes when you've been working on something in the dark and you finally let it out into the light. She listened, finished chewing, put her fork down, and said, "That sounds risky." Not a question, not an invitation to go further, just a 3-word assessment. I explained the model, the client acquisition approach, the fact that I'd already had informal conversations with 2 business owners who were interested in moving forward. She said, "I just hope you're not wasting your time on pipe dreams." Pipe dreams. I remember the exact weight of that phrase. I remember going quiet for the rest of that dinner. She moved on to other topics like nothing had happened. I sat across from her and felt something quietly close inside me. Not dramatically, like a door clicking shut in a room at the end of a hallway. I should have said something then. I know that now. But by that point, I had already learned, without anyone teaching me explicitly, that saying what I actually thought in those moments led to analysis, questioning, gentle redirection. It was easier to absorb it. Stay quiet. Keep moving. And quiet is where things start dying before you notice. 3 weeks before that Sunday, she brought out printed apartment listings. She'd been researching neighborhoods, comparing commute times, thinking about furniture placement. She had a whole picture in her head. I looked at those printouts and felt something cold move through me. Not excitement, not even regular nerves. Something harder to name, like my body was giving me information that my mind hadn't processed yet. I said, "These look nice." She said, "I need to know you're serious about this." I said, "I am." She studied me for a moment, then said, "You say that, but sometimes I think you're still working through things that people our age should have figured out already." I asked what things. She said, "Life direction, stability, what you actually want." I told her I knew what I wanted. She said, "I hope so." And that stayed with me for days. I hope so. Like she was extending provisional credit. Like I was on a performance review with an uncertain outcome. I talked to Qley about it. He said, "I've been watching her say variations of this for over a year. At some point you have to ask yourself what you're actually getting from this." I told him she just had high expectations. He said, "There's a difference between high expectations and a low opinion. Do you know which one you're dealing with?" I didn't have a good answer. I thought about that all week. And then came that Sunday. It was an ordinary morning. I'd brought coffee. She'd made toast. We were sitting in her living room with the sunlight, doing what Sunday sunlight does, soft and unhurried. And she put down her mug and said, "I've been thinking." I said, "About what?" "About us. The future." "Okay. I want to be honest with you about something." And I went still. Not scared. Just fully present in a way I hadn't been in a while. "I don't think you're husband material," she said. A pause. "Let's be honest." And I waited. I waited for context. For explanation. For the part where she added something that would make it make sense, or at least open a conversation. She said, "You're a genuinely good person. But good isn't always what's needed. I need someone more established. Someone with a clear trajectory. Someone I can see a real future with." Trajectory. That word again. I looked at her face. Calm. Even. Like a doctor delivering a diagnosis they'd been holding since the last visit. I understood in that moment that there was nothing to argue. Not because she was right, but because she had already decided. You cannot debate a verdict. You can only choose what to do next. I stood up, reached for my jacket, looked at her one more time. She was watching me, waiting for whatever came next. I walked out. She thought I left because I was hurt. Maybe she expected me to need a few hours before I could compose something to send. Maybe she expected bargaining. A list of reasons she was wrong. A speech designed to make her reconsider. That's not what happened inside me. What happened was something I still find difficult to explain cleanly. Standing there, hearing those words delivered that calmly, something shifted. Some weight that I'd been quietly carrying for a very long time finally made itself visible. All of it at once. The years of adjusting. The comments about my job and my apartment and my friendships. The pipe dreams line over dinner. The "I hope so" delivered like a conditional approval. The constant, low-level hum of being evaluated and found slightly lacking. The shape of it was suddenly visible, the whole thing, and instead of collapsing under it, I felt the first thing close to actual freedom I'd felt in years. I know that sounds strange. Freedom doesn't always come from good moments. Sometimes it comes from the moment that finally makes everything clear enough that you can't pretend anymore. She texted that evening. I didn't say that to hurt you. I thought you deserved honesty. I read it, put the phone down, went back to what I was doing. She texted again the next morning. Can we talk? I read that one too. Didn't respond. Not from game playing. Not from strategy. I simply had nothing to say. For the first time in almost 4 years, I didn't feel the pull to repair, smooth, or circle back. That absence told me more than any conversation could have. I called Cole. He picked up on the second ring. I told him what happened. He was quiet for a few seconds. Then, what are you going to do? I said, I'm going to build the thing I've been wanting to build. The consulting idea? Yeah. A beat of silence. Then he said, I'm in. That's what real friendship sounds like. Not are you sure? Not that's a big risk. Just, I'm in. They move when you move. The first month on my own was disorienting in ways I hadn't expected. Not because of grief exactly. More like decompression. I had been in a relationship where I was constantly being evaluated for so long that I'd internalized the evaluation. Even without Brooke there, I could still hear the commentary. Is this a pipe dream? Is this what an established person would do? Is this enough? That voice takes time to quiet. But it does quiet. Mine quieted slowly, then more quickly, then almost all at once. I registered the business in the second week. Cole came over, and we worked through the paperwork together, talked through the model, refined it, argued about pricing structures, ordered takeout, and worked until well past midnight. It felt more alive than anything I'd done in a long time. 3 pilot clients lined up before the month was over. A restaurant owner trying to grow delivery numbers. A boutique fitness studio building its membership base from scratch. A small tech repair shop trying to differentiate in a market full of sameness. None of them had large budgets. All of them had real problems. I had real solutions. And doing work that was completely mine, not justified through anyone else's filter, not pre-edited to avoid critique, was like using muscles I'd forgotten I had. Second month. Brooke texted again. Longer this time. She said she'd been doing a lot of thinking. That the conversation hadn't come out the way she intended. That she wanted to know if there was still something worth working through. I read the message carefully, twice, then set my phone face down on my desk and went back to the proposal I was building. It wasn't cruelty. It wasn't strategy. The pull simply wasn't there anymore. That thing that used to make me circle back, apologize, try to restore equilibrium. It was gone, and its absence was information. I landed my first significant client in month 3. A mid-sized retail company struggling with online sales conversion. Real work. A proper contract. Actual money attached to actual results. I went deep into their process. Mapped the full customer journey from first contact to closed sale. Rebuilt their outreach sequences from the ground up. Coached their sales team twice a week. Ran the numbers. Adjusted, refined, ran them again. 3 months later, their conversion rate had gone up by over 40%. They referred me to 2 other businesses before that engagement even ended. Those businesses referred me to 3 more. The thing about doing genuinely good work is that it travels. Not loudly, but consistently. And consistent was what I had always been, even when that consistency was being dismissed as not enough. Cole mentioned one evening that I seemed different. I told him I wasn't different. I told him this was just who I had always been. I'd just spent 4 years letting someone convince me that version of myself wasn't worth much. He didn't say anything to that. He just nodded. The kind of nod that means, I knew, I watched, and I'm glad you finally know too. Month 4. Networking event across town. The kind I used to avoid. Brooke had told me once that I was bad at working a room. That I came across as too casual, too unpolished. That I didn't project the right image for someone trying to build something real. So I'd stopped going. Partly to avoid the critique. Partly because some piece of me had half believed her. That night, I went alone. No agenda. No image to project. I wore what I felt comfortable in. Talked to people I found genuinely interesting. Didn't perform anything. And at some point during the evening, I ended up in a conversation with a woman named Leah. Brand strategist. Early 30s. Confident in a quiet way. Not the kind of confidence that announces itself, but the kind that doesn't need to. We started talking about work. Then about risk. Then about what it actually feels like to bet on yourself when most people around you are playing it safe. The conversation ran. 40 minutes. 90 minutes. I stopped tracking time somewhere in the middle of it. At the end of the night, she said, "I want to keep talking about this." I said, "So do I." That was it. But something about that conversation stayed with me. Not just about her specifically, about the feeling of it. The ease. No undercurrent of judgment. No filtering myself through someone else's expectations before I opened my mouth. Just two people actually interested in each other. I'd forgotten what that felt like. And forgetting something like that is a particular kind of quiet damage. We had coffee 2 weeks later. A Tuesday morning. A corner table in a small cafe. Nearly 3 hours sitting there. She asked questions that made me think, genuinely think, not defend, not justify. When I told her the full story of the business, where the idea came from, the way it started, where it was heading, she leaned forward and said, "That's genuinely impressive. Most people have an idea like that and do absolutely nothing with it." A clean compliment. No asterisk attached. And I didn't know how to receive it properly. She noticed. She said, "You look like you don't believe me." I said, "I'm still working on that part." She smiled and said, "Keep working on it." We started seeing each other after that. Dinners that ran long. Weekend mornings that didn't rush toward anything. The slow, careful kind of getting to know someone that happens when neither of you is filling a gap. She had her own full life. Her own work, her own ambitions, her own circle of people. She didn't need me to complete anything. She just wanted me there. And that distinction, wanting someone's presence rather than needing their completion, was something I felt before I had language for it. She pushed back on my ideas sometimes. Argued her point clearly. Disagreed without softening it into something passive. But when she did, it was to sharpen what I was saying, not to dismiss it, not to add it to a mental list of evidence about my shortcomings. She asked what I thought about things, and then she actually listened to the answer. I would catch myself mid-conversation thinking, this is what it's supposed to feel like. Not perfect, just real. Month 5. Something I haven't told most people. During the last 18 months with Brooke, I had started seeing a therapist. Not at her suggestion, because I'd noticed something in myself that I didn't like. I was second-guessing decisions I'd already made, replaying conversations, looking for where I'd gone wrong, pre-editing my own ideas before they were fully formed, anticipating the critique before it came, shrinking my instincts to fit through a filter I'd built out of her responses. My therapist was a direct, calm woman who didn't waste words. In one of our early sessions, she asked me something I've turned over many times since. She said, "Who taught you that your own instincts were unreliable?" I didn't answer immediately, but I knew the answer. It wasn't one event. It wasn't one conversation. It was accumulation. For years of small corrections. For years of subtle, consistent signals that my judgment needed supervision. Pipe dreams. I hope so. Basic things people your age should have figured out. You're not husband material. None of those sentences were screamed. Every single one landed. And the insidious thing about that kind of damage is that it doesn't feel like damage while it's happening. It feels like someone keeping you honest. Like the other person cares enough to protect you from your own blind spots. It takes real distance to see the difference between someone who challenges you because they believe in what you can become and someone who challenges you because they've already decided what you can't. The first kind makes you expand. The second kind makes you shrink. I had been shrinking. Consistently. Methodically. Not from cruelty, but from steady, quiet erosion that I had mistaken for honesty for far too long. When she delivered that verdict on that Sunday morning, with her coffee still warm and her voice perfectly composed, I was small enough that I could finally see exactly how far I'd come from my original size. Leaving wasn't drama. Leaving was the first honest breath I'd taken in years. There was something else I discovered. A few months after the breakup, through a mutual friend who mentioned it casually, not knowing they were handing me a key. They said that Brooke talked sometimes about someone she'd dated years before me. Someone she described to people in her life as the one who got away. Established. Driven. High-achieving in the specific way she valued most. And according to this friend, Brooke had spent a meaningful portion of our relationship measuring me against that memory. Not against my own potential. Not against who I was growing into. Against a ghost. An idealized version of someone from her past who had been polished by nostalgia into something no living person could compete with. I wasn't being held to a standard. I was being held to a memory. That's an unwinnable game. And I spent almost 4 years not knowing I was playing it. I'm not saying this to explain her or excuse her. I'm saying it because it made things make sense in a way they hadn't before. The constant feeling of starting behind. The sense that no matter what progress I made, I was adjusting toward a target that kept quietly moving. Now I knew why it moved. It wasn't really about me. It was about something she was carrying and hadn't put down. Unresolved comparison. An old chapter she hadn't fully closed. And rather than do that harder internal work, the easier thing was to outsource her dissatisfaction. Let my supposed shortcomings explain the distance she felt. It's a human thing to do. It's also something that quietly dismantles another person. Month 6. The business had its best month since launch. Revenue was up. Referrals were coming in without me chasing them. My reputation was building in exactly the spaces I wanted it to build. I moved into a better apartment. Not a statement. Not a symbol. Just a natural upgrade that matched where things were actually heading. Better light. A real workspace. Hardwood floors. A view worth looking at in the morning. Leah helped me settle in. We spent an absurd amount of time on throw pillow colors, debating, vetoing, landing somewhere that made no logical sense, but somehow looked exactly right. We were laughing about it by the end of the evening. Not polite laughter. The real kind. The kind that makes your shoulders drop and your face do things without your permission. I stood in the middle of that room and looked around at everything. My choices. My taste. My work sitting on the desk in the corner. My life, assembled without anyone's approval. And I felt something I want to describe carefully. Not pride exactly. Not triumph. A quietness. But not the hollow kind. The full kind. The kind that happens when your inside and outside are finally in the same place at the same time. Cole and I took a weekend trip that month. First one in over 2 years. On the drive there, he said, "You remember telling me she just had high standards?" "Yeah." "You understand the difference now?" he asked. "Between what exactly?" He said, "High standards and low regard." I thought about that for a moment. High standards means you believe someone can rise to them. Low regard means you've already decided they won't. "Yeah," I said. "I understand it now." He turned up the music. We drove. That was the whole conversation. But I carried it for weeks. Low regard, dressed in the language of honesty. That was the most precise description of what those 4 years had actually been. Month 7. Leah and I had become real. No awkward label conversations. No pressure to define or categorize. Just a consistent, daily choosing of each other that felt effortless without being careless. She met Cole. He liked her immediately, said something to me afterward that I won't repeat because it would embarrass us both. She fit in with the people in my life not because she performed anything, but because she was just herself. And herself turned out to be easy and genuine and worth knowing. Late one night, while we were talking about something entirely unrelated, I told her a version of the story. Not all of it. Just enough. She listened without interrupting once. When I finished, she said, "Anyone can be made to doubt themselves when someone they love keeps questioning them. That's not a character flaw. That's just how trust operates. It flows in the direction of whoever you let it flow toward." I sat with that. Then I said, "I should have seen it sooner." She said, "You saw it." 2 words. But they landed differently than 4 years of sentences ever had. Month 8. A Saturday morning. Farmer's market near my apartment. Leah and I with coffee cups, taking our time, nowhere to be. She was making a passionate and detailed argument about heirloom tomatoes. I was arguing the price couldn't be justified without context. She told me she'd never met someone with stronger opinions about produce. I told her she hadn't met enough people. She laughed. And then, at the edge of my vision, I saw her. Brooke, across the row of stalls, maybe 30 feet away, looking at something on a nearby table. And she looked up. At the exact moment I glanced over. Eye contact. Clear and direct. I felt something move through me. Not the flood I might have expected, not that stomach drop sensation of old things rushing back. More like recognition without charge. Acknowledgement without history. I gave her a brief nod, then turned back to Leah, who was still in the middle of her tomato argument. I laughed at something she said. Not for an audience. Not for anyone watching. Just because it was actually funny. But I was aware, in the corner of my vision, that Brooke was still there. Still looking. Not moving away. I didn't look back. But I could feel the direction of her attention. She was seeing the apartment building visible from where we stood. She was seeing the woman beside me, comfortable, present, laughing without trying. She was seeing the way I moved through that morning. Unhurried, unguarded, like someone who had nothing to prove and no longer needed to. She was seeing everything she had said I wasn't capable of. Not arranged for her benefit. Not performed for her consumption. Not designed as a response to anything she'd said. Just happening. Quietly, ordinarily, genuinely happening. The life of a man who stopped waiting for someone else's verdict to tell him who he was. She texted me that afternoon. I hadn't expected it. The message said, "You look really well. Genuinely. I think I made a mistake." I read it once. Set my phone face down on the kitchen counter. Finished making dinner. Leah came over that evening. We ate together. Watched something. Talked late into the night about things we were planning. A trip we'd both been wanting to take. Something she was building with a new client. A contract I was putting together that felt like the next real step. It was a full evening. Not perfect. Just real. At the end of the night, after she left, I picked up my phone. Brooke's message was still there. I deleted it. Not from bitterness. Not from performing closure for my own benefit. There was simply nothing in me that needed to respond. The verdict she had delivered 8 months ago was the last full sentence of a chapter. What she was offering now wasn't a conversation. It was a revision. And I've learned something about chapters since then. Some of them don't get revised. They just end. The story continues on the next page. Without looking back. There's one more thing I want to say about that Sunday. About the moment right before she said it. She had both hands wrapped around her coffee mug. She was looking at me. And for just a fraction of a second, before the words came, I caught something in her expression that I couldn't name then. I've turned that expression over many times since. I think it was uncertainty. Not contempt. Not superiority. Just genuine uncertainty. Because underneath all the plans and spreadsheets and timelines, beneath the color-coded notes and the apartment printouts and the careful assessments, I think Brooke was someone who didn't fully know what she wanted. And not knowing is uncomfortable. And uncomfortable needs somewhere to go. The easiest place to put it is on the person in front of you. If I'm uncertain, maybe it's because he's uncertain. If I'm dissatisfied, maybe it's because he's not enough. If I can't see the future clearly, maybe it's because he's not capable of building one. I'm not saying this to protect her or excuse what was said. I'm saying it because I spent too long being angry at the verdict when the truth is, the verdict was never really about me. It was about what she hadn't resolved in herself. Her unfinished comparison. Her old chapter she'd kept open. Her fear that wanting something meant she had to have it perfectly mapped before she could trust it. She could have said any of the real things. She could have said, "I'm not sure we want the same life." She could have said, "I've been comparing you to someone from before, and I know that's not fair." She could have said, "I think I'm carrying something I haven't dealt with yet." Any of those would have been honest. Instead came the conclusion. The verdict. Delivered with composure. With certainty. "You're not husband material. Let's be honest." I told my therapist the full story eventually. Several months after everything had settled. She listened without interrupting. Then she asked, "How does it feel to have that kind of clarity now?" I thought about it properly before answering. I said, "Like putting down something heavy that I'd carried for so long. I forgot it wasn't mine to carry." She nodded and said, "That's exactly right." The business closed out its first year with 8 ongoing clients. Revenue that exceeded what I'd earned in any previous full year. More importantly, work that I was genuinely proud of. Work that came from a real place. Not proof. Not performance. Not an attempt to become whoever would finally earn a passing grade. Just capable, honest work, done without anyone's approval as a prerequisite. And that's all it had ever needed to be. I was always capable of it. I just needed to stop routing my energy through someone else's doubt. When that energy isn't bleeding out through a hole in your confidence, it goes somewhere. Mine went into building something that mattered. Cole organized a small gathering to mark the first year. Close friends. Good food. Nothing loud or performative. Leah was there. At one point during the evening, she pulled me aside and said, "Can I tell you something I noticed about you the first night we talked?" "Go ahead." "You weren't trying to impress anyone. You were just talking. Like someone who already knows exactly who he is and doesn't need to announce it." I said, "I wasn't always like that." She said, "I know. You told me. But that's who you were that night. And that's who you are now." I didn't say anything for a long moment. I just looked at her. And I thought about the distance between that Sunday morning, the toast, the coffee, the sentence delivered like a final diagnosis, and this moment right here. 8 months. One sentence. One long, quiet walk back toward myself. The man I was before I'd been slowly edited into someone smaller. The man I would have become sooner if I'd trusted his instincts instead of handing that trust to someone who'd already made up her mind. The man she said couldn't be someone's husband. Standing in a room full of people who were genuinely glad he existed. I've been asked by people who know the full story whether I regret walking out without saying anything. Whether some part of me wishes I'd delivered a speech. The perfect parting words that would have made her understand, in that exact moment, what she was actually letting go of. And my honest answer is no. Not because a speech wouldn't have felt momentarily satisfying. It might have, but a speech requires a particular kind of audience. And the person who needs to deliver it is someone who still needs to be understood by the one who hurt them. I didn't need that. Not anymore. What I needed was to leave. To go outside. To breathe. To stop spending my energy explaining myself to someone whose mind was already made up. The silence wasn't defeat. The silence wasn't absence of something to say. The silence was the first truly honest move I'd made in a long time. There's one last thing. About what I've learned since all of this. About the difference between a relationship that slowly shrinks you and one that simply lets you breathe. When someone genuinely sees you, not the potential they're waiting for you to catch up to, not the version of you that fits neatly into their plan, not a comparison to someone else's memory, but actually you, as you are, right now. It doesn't feel like relief. It doesn't feel like validation. It feels like standing in clear light. The kind where you're not hiding anything, not performing anything, not editing yourself before you speak, where your actual self is visible, fully visible. And that visibility doesn't scare you, because the person beside you isn't holding a grading rubric. They're just there, interested in the real thing. I had forgotten what that felt like. And once you feel the difference between someone who sees you and someone who measures you, you cannot pretend you don't know. That knowledge changes what you'll accept. It changes what you'll walk away from. It changes everything, slowly, quietly, permanently. I think about that Sundays sometimes. Not often, but sometimes. The sunlight through the window, her hands wrapped around the coffee mug, the steady, composed delivery of those words. And I think about how close I came to spending another year trying to become whatever would finally earn a different verdict. Another year adjusting. Another year pre-editing. Another year slowly forgetting the shape of my own confidence. I was tired enough that familiar discomfort still had its pull. But she made it clean. She made the verdict so final that there was nothing left to negotiate. No small hope to hold on to. No vague possibility of turning things around if I just tried one more thing. She closed the door. Firmly. With certainty. And I walked through it. 8 months later, standing in a farmer's market on a Saturday morning. Coffee warm in my hand. Something genuine beside me. A business that was working. A life that felt entirely like mine. She saw the answer to everything she'd been so certain about. Not arranged for her. Not performed for her. Not designed as a response to anything she'd said. Just life. Continuing. A man who stopped waiting for someone else's judgment to tell him who he was. She called it a verdict. I called it a door. And some doors. You just have to walk through.